formula to it. A very simple formula.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Bite Size Film. My name is Jared, and as you can tell, instead of doing the Halloween franchise this time, we will be doing the Scream franchise. If you have not heard of Scream but have watched my videos before, please do watch them, as most movies after Scream looked at Scream as a way to innovate the genre. The most important way to understand this is to make sure you know about the tropes before this movie. If you do, this movie feels like a love letter directly to you, and that's because it is. The character of Randy in this movie plays someone who loves horror movies simply because they love horror movies. The way that me and most of you are simply fascinated and in love with the genre. Now, Scream changed everything for horror movies, and that is entirely its own. But you can describe the genre as pre-Scream and post-Scream in terms of the movies and the way they were created. Well, all this seems crazy for just one movie. You'll just have to wait and see, and for now, let's get biting. Scream came out on December 20th, 1996, and grossed a total of $173 million, with a budget of $15 million. The way this movie changed the genre is absolutely insane. I will skip a lot of what I would usually say here because I think it would be best to save it for afterwards, but with that, our movie begins. We cut to a black screen where Scream slaps onto the screen. We hear a phone call and a girl named Casey Becker answering the phone. She's talking to currently a nameless voice, and she goes to make popcorn while the phone rings once again for the third time. The killer asks the famous line,
"What's your favorite scary movie?"
The guy starts to be really creepy before he starts screaming at her, and then he tells her they're going to play a game. The person on the other line asks who the killer is in Halloween. She gets it right, but she gets asked who the killer is in Friday the 13th, but she gets it wrong, exclaiming Jason, when in fact it was his mother. The killer kills her boyfriend, who is tied up on her patio, and now it's her turn. She runs away from the killer, who we actually see for the first time. She runs inside and manages to get slow motion stabbed while holding the phone while her parents pull up. She crawls out and tries to scream but can't because she had her throat crushed. Her parents are running around looking for her, but her mom can hear her moaning in pain, and the line ends. The mom looks outside and finds Casey hanging from the tree completely gutted and smashed to black. I purposely cut this down as much as possible so I can give you the whole story, but the mastercraft of the direction and writing of Scream is entirely pulled into this one scene. There is not a single greater opening of any horror movie in my opinion than this. It equals to all the greats. It's also packed with good, hidden references like when the dad of Casey Becker tells his wife to drive down to the Mackenzies. That is the same as Laurie Strode telling the kids to run down to the Mackenzies and call the police. I really love that reference. It shows just how important this was to Kevin Williamson. We cut to our new main character, Sidney Prescott. Also, I couldn't believe what it would be like for the audience to watch Drew Barrymore just die right there, and to be faced with having no idea what the rest of the movie is. She stands up and gets jump scared by her boyfriend, Billy. Her dad comes in and Billy hides. They talk about how Sidney doesn't want to have relations, and then Billy leaves. We cut back to a long shot of Woodsboro High, where in the background we see Gail. We frame down to Sidney as she walks past a bunch of newscasting until we see Gail in full view. Then we see Tatum as she talks about the fact that Casey was killed. We also find out in dialogue that Sidney's mom was killed the year before. We cut back to a very Friends-ish like shot, and we meet Stu, played by the amazing Matthew Lillard, who really shows us how good of an actor he is in this movie, as we'll see later. We also see Randy, who is the us character of this movie. He's probably my favorite. They talk about the much more in-depth about the very graphic details of Casey's death. Like, honestly, way too graphic for a bunch of friends to be talking about. Randy sort of blames / accuses about Stu being the killer. They also make a bunch of organ-related puns in this scene, which I find kind of funny because of just how off it is. Sidney gets a phone call at her house after falling asleep. It's about Tatum coming over. She hangs up and gets another phone call. It's the same voice from earlier. She thinks it's Randy, but she talks about how people in scary movies go up the stairs instead of the front door. The killer says he isn't Randy and tells her that he is on her front porch. She goes outside and there's nobody there, and she looks around while the killer on the phone tries to get her. He asks if she wants to die like her mom before she runs inside and almost gets stabbed by the killer, but she tries to get out that front door before running up the stairs as a callback. The killer tries to break in. She somehow calls 911, and somehow Billy gets directly into her window before he drops his cell phone. This was 1996, not everyone could afford or even owned a cell phone, so this is a huge deal because if you owned a cell phone there was a reason why, and maybe for Billy it was because he was the killer. Or was he? We'll find out. They also find the suit outside somewhere, and we meet Dewey, who is quite the character. The news van pulls up and Gale jumps out and sees Sidney in a police car and she misses. Gale in this movie is quite the asshole, but she changes slowly over the course of the movies. Eventually, however, Sidney is at the police station and Billy Loomis is put in holding, until they can clear him of any wrongdoing. Tatum and Sidney leave the police station out the back and Sidney punches Gale. The killer calls and tells her she is going to kill them. The next day it's said that Billy Loomis is out from prison. Gale comes and tries to get yet another interview. Sidney bumps into Billy and he acts very freaking creepy, but also not that creepy depending on who you ask. I really love how this movie gives so many different potential killers, like these two teenagers. Also, the principal breaks a few rules, I would guess. And Sidney gets attacked in this bathroom and almost dies, but of course she manages to survive. Gale and Dewey meet and lightly flirt before the principal comes over the intercom and announces that effective immediately, they are not going to be holding any more classes, so basically everyone gets to have a school break. This is the setup to the very freaking cool third act that you'll have to wait to see. We see some of our gang walking down the road. There's Stu, Sid, and Tatum. They talk about having a party at Stu's house when the principal gets a knock on the door. He thinks it's the killer, goes back to check, and it's no one. He hears a knock again, but this time goes to check the room to see if it's him, and boom, Wes Craven. He goes back to his office and manages to look in his closet and finds nothing. He goes to shut the door and oh crap, it's Ghostface. Someone doesn't like the Fonz.
Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days. Thursday, Friday, happy days.
We cut to Sid and Tatum on the front porch, and who knows, maybe this is a Wes Carpenter flick after all.
You're starting to sound like some Wes Carpenter flick or something.
There are a lot of scenes like this where Ghostface is just randomly in a bunch of different places, and it's honestly so weird. I don't know about dumb, but just weird. This is my favorite scene in any of the Scream movies, I think, ever. Randy is working when Stu comes over and tries to annoy him. They talk about Billy standing in the horror section, and they question if you should do that if you were the main suspect in a murder case. He guesses that Billy may be the killer because Sidney doesn't want to have sex with him. We get some familiar dialogue.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula.
Billy grabs Randy and Randy says, "It's the millennium. Motos are incidental," which only gets even more true as time goes on. Tatum and Dewey and Sid show up and Sid and Dewey go off into the store. For some reason, Ghostface is in full costume in the store, which just makes no sense. Dewey and the sheriff think that Sid's dad may be Ghostface. We cut back to Sid and Tatum, who manage to make it to the party at Stu's house, which ultimately sets up the third act of this movie. Dewey and Gale show up to look at the party and make sure nothing is going on as Ghostface. Tatum walks outside to the garage and tries to open the garage door, but it doesn't work. She goes to get more beers out of the fridge, but something falls behind her and the cat goes out the garage kitty door. The lights turn off and oh shit, Ghostface is behind her and he's doing the one thing that Ghostface knows how to do, kill. Tatum doesn't know that Ghostface is like the real one, and she manages to get a few blows in before almost managing to escape out the garage cat door, but she gets taken up by the door and gets her head crushed in the ceiling of the garage. Ghostface just walks slowly back inside, and we cut to Stu letting some people out, and Billy shows up right after him, and him and Sid go upstairs. Gale had planted a secret camera into the room from the beginning. They both go upstairs and have intercourse, thus making Sid no longer a virgin. This next scene of all of the group of people and Randy and have them all responding to Halloween with such reactions is a dream. But here comes the best scene of this entire movie. Randy talks about the rules and Stu doesn't know them, so he gets up. Before I reveal the 3 rules, do you know them? And if you've seen the movie before, could you guess what order they go in? Rule number 1, you can never have sex. Rule number 2, never drink or do drugs. Rule number 3, never ever say that you'll be right back. God, the rules and stuff is such an iconic part of this movie. Dewey and Gale go to check out a car that was left in the bushes. This happens while Sid and Billy are upstairs and the Halloween soundtrack plays. Randy says, "Here comes the obligatory tit shot," while we cut to Sid upstairs who takes her bra off covered by Billy. This scene is so fucking funny to me. I can't describe it, but just it's so funny. Randy gets a call that the principal was gutted and hung by the flagpole and a lot of the teenagers dragged to the school. Gale and Dewey are walking down the road when they almost get hit by teenagers driving down the road. This is where they kiss for the first time. Neil Prescott's car was found in the woods by Stu's house. Sid asks Billy who he called when he was in prison. He asks her if she still thinks the killer was Billy. He asks what he can do to prove to you that he isn't a killer and gets stabbed by Ghostface multiple times. He lays on the bed and Ghostface runs after Sydney but gets stopped while she runs into the attic. Sydney climbs onto the roof and almost gets killed by Ghostface but manages to survive by jumping off the house and landing on the boat. She sees the body of Tatum and we cut to my favorite scene of this movie. Brandy is literally describing exactly what is happening to him and it's all being scored by the Halloween theme on the TV. Sydney runs up to the news van and we find out that the camera's on a 30-second delay and Ghostface cuts the throat of the camera worker. She manages to make her way out of the back of the van and towards the barn when we cut back to Gale and Dewey. Dewey runs into the house, the Halloween theme is still playing while Dewey looks throughout the house. Gale looks into the news van looking for a camera person when she sees the blood in the van. She rips it off but the camera person falls onto her windshield and she screams for it to get off her windshield. She speeds down and almost hits Sydney but crashes into a tree after she swerves. She runs back towards Stu's house and finds Dewey stabbed in the back. Ghostface tries to jog towards Sydney. Sydney locks herself into Dewey's car and Ghostface tries to get in before running to the other side. But Ghostface has the key and they disappear. Ghostface opens up the back and almost kills her but she manages to get away. Randy shows up and he says that Stu is the killer. They both are pointing at each other before she slams the door on them both. Billy comes out of the room incredibly bloody before taking the gun from Sydney. Randy shows up but Billy says the iconic line, "We all go a little mad sometimes," before shooting Randy, confirming that Billy is a killer. And guess what? Stu is a killer too. They mess with her in the kitchen, entirely messing with her. Billy confirms that he killed Sydney's mother, but holy shit, Billy and Stu's actors in this scene are just incredible. Billy said that because her mom had relations with Billy's dad, it caused his mom to leave. Steve leaves the room and pulls out Sydney's dad. Billy stabs Stu to make it seem like the dad was the killer. Billy stabs Stu many times and Billy says the line,
I'm feeling woozy here.
Stu leaves to try to find the gun, but Gale has it, but it's empty and she gets pushed away and passes out next to Dewey. Stu is getting more and more bloody. Billy answers the phone and it's Sydney on the other end. Stu looks like he's about to die. Billy is freaking out in the living room while Stu is upset that his mom and dad are going to be so mad at him. This is all happening when the Halloween theme is playing in the other room. Sydney with the Ghostface costume on stabs and hits him with the vase and crushes his head with the TV. Randy jumps up and then Billy does but gets shot by Gale. They all crowd over Billy's body and Randy says,
The moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
and Billy wakes up and screams but gets shot. Her dad jumps out of the closet so he can be untied. Dewey is ushered into the ambulance and Gale tells the story on the news while we crane out and look over the sunset. We fade to black and we get a jump scare of Ghostface, and with that, a bite has been taken out of Scream. Scream is by far one of the best horror movies of all time. It changed the horror genre and we still feel the horror effects to this day. Scream released in 1996 and changed the horror game entirely. Multiple different franchises changed their movies because of this release. Jason X is completely different, Jason Goes to Hell is completely different, and there is 1,000 other movies that changed from the generic slasher tropes because of this movie. Even Halloween H2O was different because of this movie. Scream 2 came out only a year later. My favorite kill in this movie is Tatum's garage door death, and my least favorite is the cameraman. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. Follow my Twitter @SlasherHorror and my Instagram @SlasherHorror. If you want to listen to my podcast, please type in /it wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you. Remember, treat every day like it's Halloween.